questions or observations before we get started, I think we should dive right in. So I'm going to share my screen and make sure I can see as many of you as I still can, because still working with a little screen here. There we go. So, okay, can you all see my screen? Yes, brilliant, cool. So yeah, so I think all of you have been to the first session and the second session. So in this third session, we're going to focus a little bit more on building or curating a fairly simple website and how to keep it as low maintenance as possible for us to be able to update other people. I'm going to keep this concept of language and how we're using language in my head though now as we go through this presentation. So right, so yes, so in the first two sessions, just a very, very quick recap, we explored the idea of sort of how to make the most with the least amount of tools, and also thinking about resources and skills and time and interest in general in communications. Keeping this idea about making ourselves look as fund-worthy as possible. So making it look like we're doing something that's joined up. I think the visuals of what we present say a lot about what we're doing, and sometimes can, you know, falsely advertise in either direction. If we don't post anything out into the world, into cyberspace, it looks like that much activity is happening. But if we post a lot, it looks like there's probably more activity than is really happening on the ground. And then in the last session, we explored having a strategy. So thinking about the amount of time and resources and the stability of the team, what kind of effective time we can dedicate to doing good communications. So in this session, keeping all of those things in mind, we're going to explore a little bit more this concept of having an anchor. And we are going to have a really good strategic think about how to link things together and how to make them low maintenance so that we're not kind of creating a beast that then requires loads of our time. And the language thing, Jenny, is going to come into that as well, I think. So, right, most of all, remembering I think people get really carried away with the whole concept of a website. They're like, oh, it must be all singing and dancing and it's got to be amazing colors and visuals. But the reality is that we've only got a limited amount of time to make things really smooth and really functional and really beautiful. Actually takes a lot of effort, time and thought. And so keeping this idea of working smart with kind of, achievable chunks of goals and chunks of time, rather than this kind of massive projects that's going to take years and years and years, and before your website is actually ready, maybe the project that you're doing is over, right? So we want it to be as fit for purpose as possible. So in terms of keeping a low maintenance website, my advice would be to absolutely first and foremost focus on this anchor. So your anchor could be the web page on our website, it could be your own simple website, or it could be curating the website that you already have. And then the sort of secondary part of it is newsletters and social media and keeping everybody updated. The reason I'm separating the two out is because your website can be, as much as possible, this kind of evergreen type of content. So it explains what and who and how, but without too much like nitty gritty of things that are changing very often. And then all of the things that are more up to date, more of the moment, more current events and so on, can be delegated to updates on newsletters, social media, things that are kind of one step removed from your website. So before we get into that, we talked about this a little bit last time, and I think that my best advice for not having loads of resources and money and skills and interest towards creating a website is this little formula I wrote down at the bottom here. So my formula is have a brief, find a student or somebody young who's willing to learn and sort of show their skills through creating something to be able to put on their CV, or to show that they can do this work. Invest in a low-tech solution like WordPress, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, and those things together can create a very nice, simple, beautiful website, probably much, much faster and much more efficiently and effectively than someone whose job is not to think about communications. So in terms of what that might look like and how much it might cost, this is a very small example just to show you. I have been a volunteer. I have made a website for a voluntary organization. In total, apart from my time, which I gave for free, it costs about £50 a year to have a platform like this one. So on Wordpress, which is one of the many different kind of pre-packaged website creation platforms that exist. That's why I've got this nice £50 note here in the corner. And it's very simple and it doesn't get updated. I made it a year and a half, 2 years ago. We've hardly done any updates on it. So everything that's latest events and so on is managed by somebody else. So to click on this, oh, I should be able to click on it. And if I can't, apologies, and we'll try and do it in a different way. Hopefully, magically, it will appear, or maybe not. Let's have a look. Let me just come out and share. In an ideal world, when you're going through the presentation, you'll be able to see this really clearly and really well. But on Zoom, it's always challenging. So, right. So this is not a food partnership, but it is a voluntary organization. So I hope you can see it. Yes. So it's a very, very simple little website. The organization, as you can hopefully sort of tell from looking at the website, is a bookshop run by volunteers, providing low-cost books for local people and providing a community space. And that's what it is. And it's very simply this small space. There's actually me on the left-hand side doing yoga because I used to teach yoga there. And the home page of the website is very short. It doesn't have loads of writing. It shows who sponsors it and how and who they're linked to. It shows when it's open. So it's the sponsors, Lottery Community Fund and IKEA, and it shows how to stay connected to what's going on at the bookshop. On top of that, it also has two other pages. So this is a 4-page website, I think, where it tells you about the books that you'll find in the bookshop, how much they cost, and what kind of books you will find in the bookshop. And also it tells you about their regular events. So this is probably, in a sense, in terms of upkeep, the most problematic page of the website, because what it shows you is that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there are events. These are supposed to be very regular and not change. I don't know if they have or haven't changed because I haven't been asked to fix it. But they're very regular, they happen all the time. And so we've put this page out to say, this is what you'll find. But in terms of then finding out more about the actual specific dates or who's running the classes or how to get in touch, there are links to other places online. So this one, for example, about the yoga class takes you to an Eventbrite page, which gets updated when there are yoga classes. And this tarot study group links you to the lady who runs it. So you have to get in touch with her to find out more. But in terms of the content that's actually on the website, it's very simple, not too many words, big images, static, done once, hasn't been changed. And then finally, and this is my favorite bit, the Get Involved page basically says, if you're interested in volunteering or running an event, come to the shop and say hello. Because the whole point of it is, you know, the organization is based on people combating loneliness through meeting each other. So it tells you the address and where to go, and it tells you come physically to the place. So that doesn't change. I mean, the same can be said for here is the phone number or here is the email address. That's not one person's email address, but is like hello at blah, 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 or info at blah, blah, blah. And then again, everything else is through Instagram or Facebook. And the Instagram page that they have has lots and lots of people following it and is updated very regularly. It's also a completely mad Instagram page, but you know, as is normal for a community organization where lots of different people get passed around the responsibility of doing the communications for it. So that's an example. It's not a food partnership example, but it's a good example. So, right, coming back to our presentation, doing a bit of bouncing from one to the other. So hopefully you can see it again. So that's just an example of something that can be created. And I know that perhaps seems a little bit too simple for some of our food partnerships, but at the same time, where the option is no website versus a very small, say 4-page website, I think that this is a better way to go. So moving on to the next page, if it will let me. What? Oh, the arrow's gone all in the wrong direction. Sorry, bear with me. Actually, let's just take a moment of pause since the tech is not happy with us. Any questions or thoughts from anyone just on this one example for now? Hiya, Talia, you look
Morning.
like you might have some thoughts, but yeah, any thoughts or questions just on this one bit?
Yeah, so firstly, I think that's absolutely fabulous. And I think for those of us who don't have a website, although it's kind of, as you said, it's small, it's short, but it's far better than no presence. And it's quite, I like the fact that it's very, very clear. I like the idea that when it comes to the events page, which is always challenging, that actually having links for people to find out more can save you an awful lot of inputting and constant sort of rejigging and changing. But two questions going back probably kind of more to where you were starting with it. And the first is we talked about platform costs being around £50 with something like WordPress. Question for you is, are there additional server costs on that, and do you have to choose your own server? And the second one then is in terms of domain name, are there recommendations for whom you should be kind of obtaining those from? Because I know there's a number of organizations kind of that all offer various different kind of jigs and reels. So a bit of advice on those would be really helpful as well.
Yeah, so that's an absolutely brilliant question. So the reason I would recommend WordPress, other than it's just the one that I've always used, is it does all of those things for you. So when I say £50 a year, I mean £50 a year for the server to be hosted, to have a domain name, like everything. And you have support. So if you don't, you know, if something's gone wrong or if you don't understand how to change something, they're really, really helpful to explain to you what to do. And obviously my advice is, unless you feel like, okay, I'm gonna, crack this and get my head around how to do all of the pages of the website, sometimes it's just easier to get a young person to do it for you in a couple of hours. But the reason that my formula is brief plus student plus WordPress is because what's really important is to be super specific about exactly what you need. But yes, £50 a year for the simplest, smallest, ad-free website is for everything, including the domain name. And then you can also have it for free, but then you'll have adverts for goodness knows what on the bottom of your website, which, if you're an organization with funding, might just look a bit funny. But yes. Any other questions just at this point? I'm not sure if Jenny's trying to find the unmute button or or not. Anyway, yes.
I could ask a question because I was just trying to. What I found the really hardest when I started this for people who haven't started the website, probably because of my age, but I found like the structure of it really difficult to work out what. When I was in WordPress, the back end of it, I found it really hard, and that was because you need to think really carefully about what page links to other pages, and I got myself in such a muddle trying to come up with you need like a flow chart or a structure, and that's my only thing was it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, and you need some kind of flow diagram to navigate the back end, if that makes sense, of WordPress.
Yeah, that's a really, really good experience to share. So also WordPress is brilliant, you need a certain kind of logic to follow what to do, which is why I would first recommend just to have a brief about what you need in your website and see if you can find somebody else to do it for you. If you feel like you want to learn the logic of WordPress, which probably sounds a bit more scary than it really is, but it can be just fiddly and annoying, is find someone else who's just light years faster at that logic because they've grown up with it. I mean, even I struggle, and when we sort of were looking at how to do this one website for the community bookshop, there was actually somebody else who was about, I don't know, 9 years younger than me that had what took me a day took him like 3 hours, you know. So so it's just to say it's just some people just have the logic sort of faster to their fingertips. But right, so to come back to the presentation, so I'm going to put in a little bit of a bigger window for myself. We are talking about the logic of what you need on your website. So I've put this page in because our website is by no means perfect, but it has some of the sort of big. So the next section is what to include and best practice, and thinking about what's absolutely most important to have. So here we have obviously our logo, our branding, our colors, our font is everything. Our logo, colors, font, and kind of imagery is everything I would consider our branding. We have our tagline down here. We have the top line level, what sustainable food places is as a concept. We have top line, very highly visible on the web page, all of the links to all of our different social media platforms. And then I would say that absolutely golden rule for any website, loads of people don't do this, is that on the top level menu here where you have your main tabs, your menu tab, so about whatever it might say on your website. In our case, it's about our resources, latest things from across the networks, how to get involved, and your member login. I would say that the golden rule is no more than 5, because it's just too many. It's like when you look at a menu and you go into a restaurant and you've got your nice like starter, main, dessert options, more than like 3 in each category, and it's too much for your brain. So, and that's where you want to choose something. But here you might have stumbled across the website and you're just trying to wrap your mind around what it is that they're presenting. So you want to try and keep it as simple as possible and sort of work your way down in terms of information. So what's absolute top level most important, and then what fits underneath each one of those categories. So this is a slightly mad slide of what do you most need them to know? That's the question. When you're writing your brief, or when you're considering what's on your website or what you want to present, even on your web page, is what do you most need them to know? And it's that classic what's called sort of like year 3 English, how to write a story, why, what, who, and when. All your why, all your W's even. In the actual order of importance, I think it's more sort of the like, what is it, who is involved, why do you do it, and then the when is more like the how to get involved part. So just keeping that kind of basic structure of how you're telling a story in mind as you're separating things out into categories. Then of paramount importance is visuals, having imagery, so it's not just all massive amounts of text. Also steer away from massive amounts of text, but as we've been talking about with Jenny, we know that that's hard. So imagery, and giving people a pathway. That's why there's this little wiggly line here to say giving people a pathway of how to get involved, because especially with food partnerships, you're also trying to engage people from outside of your direct partnership and network. You want people to get engaged. How are they going to get engaged? Where do they start? How do they get involved? Do they sign up to something? Can they come to an event? How do they keep kind of staying within the loop of what's going on? And then secondary to all of that is all the social media stuff. So absolutely mostly importantly is explaining who you are, what you do, who's involved, why you're doing it, how other people can join your club, essentially. And then second of all is all the noise that we've been talking about in terms of social media. But what is useful is that we use the noise as a way to keep people updated. If we're having a website that really, really, really doesn't have much time or input into keeping it up to date. So remember how I wrote this now? Yes. Okay. So in terms of, so just going back, oh my goodness, going back one slide. Not doing a great job of navigating my own presentation today. In terms of the categories, right? So it depends very much on the structure of your organization and what you most want to say about yourself. But if we're keeping that there are 5 main top level tabs that you want to be having, I would say that there's always an about section, and the about section should really be about your partnership. But keeping in mind that for each section, there's like a pyramid of information that comes out from underneath it. You've got your about. What is your food partnership? What does that mean to have a food partnership? Who's involved in your food partnership in terms of the partners? Who is running it? Who are the humans behind the concept of partnership? Who funds it? Whatever else you might want to say about who it is. For us, for SFP, it's what is the concept of the program? Who's the team behind the program? Who are our nation partners? Who funds us? And then I can't remember the other one, but you get the picture, right? Who. And then you've got the who and the what. And then you've got the I would say that in terms of for a food partnership, it's also the why, a little bit of explanation perhaps to people who really don't know or have never come across. So that could sort of be your resources, like why do we do this work? Why is it important? Whatever your report, some statistics, how many people have you impacted? It really depends on your mission statement of your food partnership. I don't think that there's like a recipe. I can't give you necessarily a form to fill out to say, yes, this is 100% what you should replicate, because it's also about you. But this question about what to fill in the structure, we can come back to with examples, I would say, in a couple of slides. The next part, just in terms of remembering what to include in your website, is that the updates can be taken care of by a secondary, less complicated format of communication. So what we have talked about in the second session is about social media. So which social media platforms to pick and why. And again, my top level advice was pick 1 or 2 that you like. Don't worry too much about who they're impacting, because the most important thing is that you're okay to interact with them, and you're going to put things out into the world that people want to interact with and see. And a newsletter. So we kind of briefly mentioned the concept of the newsletter, but having those things that people can sign up to on your website and being able to link and refer back is really, really, really helpful in terms of updates. So anything that is how to get involved, what's going on, latest news, I would segregate more towards those things. So it's the exact same principle for news. So for anything news related, newsworthy, it's a question of what do you want people to know? Not what do you think they want to know, but what do you want people to know? Whether that's through social media, newsletters, or even like a bit of updating on your website if you have the capacity and the will and the want to have updates also on your website. But it's just a question of what do you want people to know, and how are you going to get that information across to them in the simplest format? So this easy to use sort of rule of thumb. So in terms of newsletter, we have our best practice. Newsletters, like everything else, shouldn't be too long. I would say our newsletter is probably a bit too long. There's probably a little bit too much in it. You want people really, in an ideal world, to read all of it. It's like if you imagine someone with a, old-fashioned newspaper, you kind of want them to read through all the sections. You know that they won't, because there'll be some sections that they're just not interested in. Like some people are not interested in the sport or the, I don't know, comic section, if that even still exists. but you want to keep it compact. And so again, not too much writing. You want the segments of what the different kind of news are, unless there's not all that much news. But so we have our rules of thumb. Consistency. If you can get a newsletter out every month or quarter or year, but as long as it's consistent and as long as it's more or less at the same time, there's some kind of pattern to it where people aren't left in that gap of saying, oh, but what happened to your last newsletter? What's been going on? People like to be kept informed with regularity. Like, you see a friend when you don't see them for a long time in relation to the amount of time that you would normally see them, they get a bit flustered. They don't know what's going on with you. They feel a bit out of the loop. Same thing with anything else. You want to give them the opportunity to sign up when you meet people in person if you're holding an event, but making it really, really easy to sign up or subscribe to the newsletter on your website. So that's a way of keeping people informed. If you say, like I showed you on the Clifton Community Bookshop website, it basically says you can subscribe to our newsletter, or best of all, just come in and talk to us. We'll be able to tell you everything about what's going on. Making sure that it fits within your strategy, your plan. Don't feel pressured into having a newsletter every month, especially if you don't have all that much to say each month. Make sure that it works for you. And this is the little symbol for hyperlinking. So hyperlink everything you can. Link things back to something that people will be able to find, whether that's an Eventbrite page for an in-person event, whether it's an article that you've read, whether it's something on our website. Give people links back to things, because they'll read, you find an email, you read it, you think, oh, very interesting. Maybe you delete it, maybe you keep it, and then you want to go back and be able to find the original piece of information. So give people the trail back to a source of information. We can come back to more on this as well. And then finally, social media best practice. It's a similar sort of set of instructions, is keep it small, keep it compact, don't share a photo and then have reams of text that aren't linked to anything, because the world of online cyberspace is very, very busy. Only people who are really interested will dive in. Again, keep it regular. Think about your strategy. Do you have the capacity to post once a week? Do you have the capacity to post more than that? But just make sure that there's a regularity to what you're doing, because it also gives out that message that things are happening on the ground, especially if we're looking at funders and external funders, and people want to know that what you're doing is consistent and you're active. Keep it visual. Reams and reams of text, people just get lost and bored. Describe what you're doing. I think in session 1 we talked about this. Someone who shared something with me, even on I can't remember, it was Twitter or Instagram, and just posted something, and it was just an image, and it had absolutely no explanation at all. It was just an image of something, and I said, well, this is lovely, but what are you showing me? What is this? It's just a picture of a pot. I don't understand what it is. And they went back and said, oh, I didn't realize that, I could expand on what it was or relate it to anything else. So the other golden rule here is make sure that you tag and hashtag, meaning relate it back to the people that you're speaking about, or relate it back to the thing that you're speaking about. So if you can tag other people who were present at the event or the thing that you're talking about, if you can tag other organizations that you've been working with on the thing that you're talking about, if you can tag sustainable food places because that's part of the network that you're in, or, just make sure that you're always, it's like, if you put something out into the world of cyberspace and it's got 0 links to anything else, it will just get lost. It's like on an island. If it doesn't have any attachments back to anything else, it's great, but it's hard to find. And that brings me to the next section. But before we go to this section, because I know this is a lot of different kind of ways of thinking more or less about the same thing, I'm just going to take a very small pause here and ask if anybody has any questions or thoughts or sort of experience they'd like to share. It's also okay if you don't, but I know that this is quite a lot to take in, we've been talking about website best practice segments. We've been talking about newsletter best practice and segments. We've been talking about social media posts and how to relate things back. So Sabina?
Yeah, I just wanted to check. So I think of hashtags as something that's associated with Twitter. I don't use any social media, so just checking, is that something you would do in Instagram as well?
All of them, everything.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
you have to know what, because don't people have different handles for the different social media?
Yes.
But then you'd have to know what all these handles were for Instagram versus Twitter versus.
So I'm going to briefly stop sharing and give you an example, because I think that's always just the best way to go about any of this is to show you. So that's also partly why some of my best advice is to just concentrate on one type of social media that you like and not try to do a bunch of them at the same time, because they're a bit different. They're different for different, platforms. So to give you the example of Instagram, just because it's my favorite, and my advice is pick your favorite, I'm picking my favorite. So for example, let's say we take this post here, the Household Support Fund. Oh, no, sorry, that's a bad example because that's someone else's post. So let's say we take this one, which is about Food Plymouth doing this Community of Dragons initiative. So Food Plymouth is on Instagram, so they have their @FoodPlymouth handle.
Which is
the
where?
key, oh, sorry, here. Just I don't know if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse? Yeah.
Mhm.
So just here. So it's, we tagged Food Plymouth so that they will see that we've written a post about them, and then they can share that post as well. And also it relates to, if someone comes across this and thinks, oh, the Community of Dragons initiative is really interesting, they can also click on Food Plymouth and find out more about exactly what they're doing. So we're giving them like a kind of tidbit of information that they can then go on and find out more about if they want to. This is the next segment, which we're going to come back to. So there's a link to an article on our website that people can see. And there's also these hashtags, which are sort of just general themes that relate to what we're saying, which work to gather together more people who are interested in those themes. So say if you're interested in, I don't know, Totnes, you love Totnes, and so Totnes will come up on your feed loads because you live in the area and maybe you didn't know about the Community of Dragons, or you're really interested in being an entrepreneur, or you're really interested in local food or green business. It's just a way of kind of relating to different concepts across the internet, because there are so many things going on. It's just a way of, I'm going to come on to this concept of like spider webbing things that you're talking about. But that's what it means. It's just, and we use it on Instagram, we use it on Twitter, we use it on LinkedIn. We use it also on the new kind of, what's it called? The Twitter rival Threads. It's the same. The handle, you'll be able to find it. All of the social media platforms have like an internal search engine. So if you type in and then you start typing the name of the thing, it will usually try and find it for you. And if you're already linked to them because you already follow them or they follow you, it will be able to find them for you, because the whole job of this social media platform is to try and like create all of these links and connections together. Some people don't have Instagram. So Sustain, for example, it's really hard to tag them in anything because they don't really have Instagram. So you can mention them or put them in as a hashtag, but you won't find them. Haytham, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did a quick one. So if you're gonna make a reference like @Food Plymouth, and they don't have, like you said, now Sustain doesn't have Instagram. If I wanted to put in a website or a link to a website, I actually tried to do this yesterday, and the Instagram wasn't allowing me to put it in the post. How would you do that? Is that going to be with the hashtags, or how would you do it?
So that's the next thing I'm going to come on to. So thank you for that question. Yes. Okay, right. Let's move on to the next bit because this is such a vast topic, I realize that I don't want to run out of time. So okay, right. Let's move on. Let's move on to the next bit because that's exactly what we're coming on to. So right, let's come back to the presentation. And this concept of not leaving anything hanging in cyberspace, mincing my words. So, right. And I know it can seem a bit daunting because you think, oh, I've just learned this one thing, and then she's telling me that on this other platform they do it a different way. How annoying. But that's why my advice is like focus on one platform at a time. Focus on one platform. Build your knowledge up on how one platform works, because there are lots of different ways across different platforms. So very specifically to Instagram doesn't allow you to have this link to a website on the post. All it does is allows you to link to things that exist within itself. So there's a workaround to this called Linktree, and Linktree in general is quite a useful thing to have. So Linktree allows you to, like I showed you in this post just before, it says, want to read the article, look at the link in our bio. So in the bio description of what Sustainable Food Places is at the top of our page, there's a link that says Linktree, and that takes you over to this menu, which has all of these individual links to things across the internet, which is very useful, especially if your website is lacking, because it allows you to take people straight to an article in someone else's website. It also allows us to refer people back to articles on our own website. But my trick, or what I've been doing for each post that goes on Instagram, is explain what it is, explain kind of why it's important, give people the ability to link back to this menu with the hope that they might look at the menu and think, oh, I'm interested in the community of dragons, but I'm also interested in cook and share. And the tagging of the people that are related, so they find out that you've written a post about them, and hashtagging the concepts that are attached to that post so that other people from the internet will be able to find them. So Linktree, we explored very, very slightly in our very first session. It's extremely intuitive. It's one of the simplest things to use, actually. And all it is that you put in a link from a website, it auto-generates the title, the imagery, and everything, and you can just swap around what order they appear in, and you can take them down when you think they're no longer relevant. So it's really, really, really easy to use. And I highly recommend, especially if you use Instagram. If you don't use Instagram, you know, it's useful. It doesn't really replace having a website because it always takes you to a web page on someone else's website, but it's definitely a good way of keeping things together. So this is the concept I've just explained. So for each post, there's a link, and the link often takes you to an article on our own webpage. But the bigger story here is this concept of linking everything together. So I've given you sort of the smorgasbord of all of the different platforms here, because these are the ones that we use. Except for we don't really use Facebook. But the point is that they always relate back to a central point of information that talks about you or your organization, which is why it's so useful to have a website, even if it's only 4 pages long. And your website acts as your anchor that allows everything to be pulled back together. And the reason I'm sort of giving you this spidery graphic is because that's kind of the job of social media, is to link people back to the source of the information. It's not so much the way you just sort of post things out and they kind of disappear off into cyberspace, like floating. I think it's really useful as a concept to remember to kind of tether everything back to an anchor, because otherwise you'll put a post out about, you know, I don't know, an event that happened with zero information about anything else relating to it, and people won't be able to find what you were talking about. So this is just the concept. And the newsletter acts in the same way. If you can't be bothered with any social media, having people know about events in your newsletter that relate back to, and if you want to get in touch with us, you'll find our information on our details on this webpage, or you'll find our information and details on our website. It's just always making sure that you're bringing everything back to the source. And that's it. That's all the things I wanted to go through. But I know that we have a bunch of questions and we need to talk a little bit more about this concept of language. So we've got about, how long do we have, Callum?
You've got about 10 minutes.
Brilliant. So I would say let's just open the discussion about all of the different bits and bobs that we've touched upon.
Quick question, just with Linktree, when you say when you sort of showed us and you brought us to kind of where there's that menu of websites underneath and you can hold it, is that on your website or is that on your actual Instagram account?
So it's just on our Instagram account.
Okay.
It's just on our Instagram account. I've seen people kind of use it as a website if they're really, really, really strapped for having information. I think it kind of works, but it also kind of doesn't, because all it does is links you to a web page. And so if you're missing a web page that explains who you are and what you're doing, it's still not really doing the job. That's all it does, is just link you to a web page. So that gets around your question, Haytham, of Instagram doesn't let me have a clickable link to a website. That's kind of the practice. It's a bit of a weird thing, but it's the kind of the practice on Instagram is to say, look at the link in our bio, and then you'll go into the bio and have this menu of different options. Just to say, all of the other platforms allow you to directly link to your web page, which is annoying. But so Twitter, and LinkedIn, Facebook, they will just directly link to whatever it was that you were talking about. So it's easier.
Thank you.
No worries. Anybody else? Anybody also want to talk a little bit more about language and simplifying things, or any inspiration that you've had over the course of these mad slides that I've been presenting? Callum, any thoughts from you? You've got this sort of half smile going on. I'm seeing some cogs whirring on your end.
Just thinking about how little I know about social media. And I guess for me, I'm interested about that sort of language aspect of things. And it's always a problem I'm working with in my work, of taking complex things and making them simple. Do you have any more advice on that front?
I think my sort of framework for thinking about this is, okay, you've kind of got to assume that people don't know what you're talking about always. Like, just in life in general, people don't know what you're talking about most of the time. So it's be prepared to give a little bit of context, but also remember that they've got the attention span of, I don't know, a 9-year-old. So, they don't know what you're talking about. They need a little bit of background information, but they've got very short attention span. How would you speak to someone if you keep all of those things in mind? That's not to say that it's important to dumb things down. I don't think it's about dumbing things down. I think it's more about just keeping things succinct. And sometimes, and when I was a student and I was writing essays, and there'd be tens of thousands of words long, and then someone come and sort of edit them and chop them in half. It's also just, instead of saying 3 words, just say 1. Instead of it needs to be, you say it must. It's just very small things like that sometimes, especially for things like Twitter, where there's such a restricted word count that you kind of have to get around and just say, what's the least amount of words I could use to convey this sentence and it still makes sense in English? That's why I don't enjoy Twitter. And I think it's also about, there are certain concepts that we're also as a network trying to sell to people in the world, aren't we? So we're trying to sell the concept of food systems and systems thinking, and we're trying to sell the concept of good food. So there's also power in repetition. There's also power in if you've written a post and it's related to the good food movement, you know, hashtag it good food movement. Eventually the internet will learn that good food movement relates to these articles. There's also an element of kind of, there are people involved, but there's also AI involved, and we're trying to teach the people and we're trying to train the algorithm. So we just have to keep repeating the same things over and over and over and over, because eventually people will think, oh yeah, food systems thinking, I've heard about that quite a lot. Yeah. It's kind of an element of just, yeah, continuing this repetition. And what else? And I think in a way, having this, if you also keep this kind of idea of the pyramid of what you're trying to relay, there's at the top of the pyramid is like, what do you most want them to know? If you've only got their attention for like 30 seconds, what are you going to tell them? And then if you kind of manage to hook them and they want to know a little bit more, what else do you want them to know? And then, you know, if they get deep into the wormhole of what you're saying, how deep can you take them, basically? I know it's a really bizarre concept and maybe sound a bit like a mad person, because it sounds like that's how I have conversations with people. But but it's kind of you can't automatically assume that what you're saying is interesting to somebody else. All you can do is invite them in. And I think a slide that I probably should have included in the presentation is this whole concept of the art of invitation. And it's not like a marketing ploy to say, you know, big shiny headline, but we're missing a little bit of that in general in the sort of climate and food world. We're missing this like hook thing, because we think that everyone within what we're talking about is already very interested. And I think that's a bit of a mistake, because we want to hook more people in. So think about the shiny headline. Like, take yourself back to, you know, year 8 English, where they're asking you who, what, when, how, and how are you going to hook them in? What's your title of your story? There's a bit of an element of that. You know, think 9-year-old. I don't know if that's helpful.
I think, yeah, that is very helpful, Mara. I mean, when you were saying that, I was thinking about, I don't know who was here from the at the SFP conference, but Kath from Sustain said something there that stuck with me about those things that we say in this sector, in this world that we work in around food, that we feel like we're saying all the time. And that 100th time that we're saying it might be the first time somebody's heard it. So it might be bread and butter to us, but it really might be new to somebody. And having the confidence then to sort of keep that repetition on message. We've been going through a process at SFP trying to respond to some feedback from the network around needing to have more succinct documents that really capture what it is we do, what a food partnership is, what it does, how it has impact, but also what's a food system, because that's another one that we throw around a lot, I think, in our world. But for a lot of people, it's kind of meaningless. But these things are by nature really complex. So we've been going through this process, and it kind of feels like a big funnel where you start with lots of this complexity, but ultimately you're trying to get down to the essence. And as you were saying, Mara, sometimes that needs to be slightly ruthless with the words that you're using. And I think it's one of George Orwell's rules of writing that if you can write a sentence and you can read it without a word being there and it still makes sense, then you have to get rid of that word. I think, yeah, so we're on this learning journey as well about sort of, yeah, just getting down. And it's that iterative process, I think, in your messaging, isn't it? Starting with the complexity, but then working it, drafting it, working it until you find those few lines that really capture ultimately what you're trying to say. But no easy thing to do, of course.
And I think the other thing is, just to mention, because we've talked a lot about language in terms of words, but there's also language in terms of imagery. And that's why, you know, I think a lot about it because of Instagram, but it's a little bit the same concept that if all we're seeing in terms of food partnerships is just images of people sat in meetings, it's not very sexy, it's not very exciting. I don't want to know about your meeting. You know, but if it's some juicy, I don't know, plums on a plate that are talking about, that's very intuitive. And I think that the language thing is also intuitive, but the imagery is very intuitive. It's something that captures your attention, that you think, oh yeah, that's a really lovely image, I want to know more. That's kind of how Instagram works, is you're scrolling through, you see an image and you think, oh yeah, what's this? If it's just pictures of people in conferences, I mean, you know, you're there and you don't even want to know about it. So Italia has done some amazing imagery sort of created imagery for Glasgow and Nourish Scotland as well with her podcast. Talia's been making a podcast. This is a whole other concept that we haven't come on to at all, because there are some food partnerships making podcasts, but I think that's a whole separate sort of workshop on its own. We don't have a podcast either, but yeah, Talia's been making some amazing imagery with what's it called, Talia? Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, are you thinking of the collages, the collage
Yeah.
sort of thing? Yeah, so kind of Mara, from what you were saying, I feel like sometimes it's tricky because there's always a lot of work happening, but it is kind of maybe not that interesting to post on social media. So sort of how I've tried to get around that a little bit is whenever anyone or one of our partners is running a public event, I'll go along with loads of collage materials and get people to make some sort of food collage, and then those can be scanned into the computer and then are quite nice visually. And then you have also lots of pictures of people doing crafts and nice stuff like that. So yeah, that's a bit of a bit more of the kind of community focus. So I think that can be a good way to get around it, get people to do a craft. And collage I really recommend, because as like you can get people to kind of think about, you know, collage your ideal food system, or what does something kind of an emotional kind of response to food or something like that with collage. And then also everyone can do it because it's just cutting and sticking. So it's not going to put people off. So yeah, I really enjoy doing that. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I'm just trying to find an example so that people can see what we're talking about. Here we go. I'm just going to share this so people can see. And Jenny has a question as well while I pull it up. Jenny, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it was just sort of similar to what just then is what we were talking about this as a partnership, about that need to get that hook and not just show pictures of meetings and really boring policy stuff, as you just said. And we were sort of wondering whether like a quick animation video to explain in 1 minute what we are and what we do was kind of needed. Those really nice animations that you can get. Someone within the partnership did one recently for the integrated local delivery framework that they've kind of worked on for years, which totally sounds boring and nobody would look at. But via a little animation, it's worked. Don't know how we'd pay for that, but we thought it was something we're going to look into. And we attended a climathon the other day. And the way that the climathon was captured, because it was essentially just a big meeting, like a workshop, an artist came along and she created a piece of art to capture the climathon. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing to investigate further. So she's like done this really great piece of art which captured all of the different ideas that were discussed in the event. And that's much easier to share on social media than, as you say, a picture of the meeting.
Yeah, I think being creative about it is important, you know. I think being creative, thinking a little bit outside the box about how you can share these things. It's brilliant. And so this is Talia's one of Talia's collages, just showing good food, the Glasgow Food Summit, and any kind of illustration, animation, because I think that has a lot of power too. It just doesn't have to be exactly the thing that happened. It can be a kind of representation of what you're wanting to show. And I absolutely believe in giving young people the opportunity to show off their skills and to test things and to try things. That's not to say don't pay them, but definitely give them the opportunity to start on their, creative career, because they do amazing things, absolutely incredible things. And I mean, even me making the film for Sustainable Food Places is a total experiment. I've never made a film before. But I've been given the opportunity and the chance to make a fairly low budget film about our network. And, I'm hoping that gives a lot of explanation in a way that can't be done just through words and maybe images. So I'd say, get creative. There's always people out there who are wanting to make small films, make small animations, make art. It's just a really, really great way of doing a different kind of partnership and collaboration. So Yeah. So I am going to, in my recording, when I share the recording, which I'll do later today, I'm also going to share some notes and some examples of really good partnership websites and a little bit of a suggestion on website structure, because I know that's the thing that we sort of didn't manage to fully cover. But yeah, 12:02, so I don't want to keep anyone more than I promised to, but if anybody has any other questions or anything else, feel free to send me an email. And if you want to catch up on the sessions which we had at the beginning, they will all be under our events page.